Hello and welcome to Better Under Pressure. I'm Sara, Milne, author of The Shed Method and founder of Coaching Impact. And in this podcast, I talk to leaders from all walks of life about being better under pressure and using pressure for better. I want to explore how we handle pressure in a world that is becoming more and more complex, the impact that pressure has on our ability to perform at our best, and what we do to be better under pressure.
In a startup, you are acutely aware that every new investment you make needs to pay off. And you are acutely aware that the success of the sales team and booking the revenue that month pays 30 people's mortgages. And when you're a small group and you all work in the same office, it really matters. And when the times are great, it's wonderful, it's fun, it's exciting, it's innovative, it's so agile, no stupid rules, and you can really stretch your wings. But when things aren't going so well, there's not a big safety net. And so the stakes in some ways really couldn't be higher.
Today, I'm talking to Chloe Cameron, Chief People Officer for the Pax8 EMEA region. She's worked in global corporates and small startups and occupied a variety of leadership roles across marketing, business operations, and most recently, people. She came to a career in tech via a degree in history at Cambridge. She sees her role as developing the vision and strategy for maintaining and scaling an inclusive, high-performance culture built on servant leadership, psychological safety, and genuine community. She describes her mission as nothing short of empowering every Pax8er to do the best work of their lives. In 2021, Chloe received the CompTIA Advancing Women in Technology Leadership Award. She describes herself as an unashamed analog book nerd who loves hunting through second-hand bookshops to build up a collection of original Penguin classics. In this episode, she bangs the drum for taking rest seriously, loudly and proudly, confesses that she's a recovering rescuer, and describes the different pressures of abundance and scarcity, and also how a moment of pressure rang in her ears for months afterwards. Chloe, welcome to Better Under Pressure. It's so good to have you on.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Really delighted to be here.
Good. Chloe, how do you experience pressure?
I used to think it was in my head, but what I've learned is it's a very physical phenomenon to begin with. So I experience it first normally either in my stomach, like a knot, or across my shoulders as like a tension. And what's interesting, since we've kind of got used to this world of hybrid working, at least, it's kind of different when I'm on my own versus when I'm in a group. So when we were in the office every day, if I kind of felt pressure in a meeting situation, the way I would feel those feelings and the way I would then control that pressure was often just to retreat within myself, almost kind of put up a wall and kind of try to endure the moment. Just like if I can just keep quiet and not say something I'll regret, stay in control by staying silent, I can kind of endure the pressure. I did notice though, when we're sort of working from home a lot, and because you're just in a room by yourself and you're slightly more detached from people down a call, if I experienced it, and the joy of being able to go off camera, it would often come out as like I kind of release the physical pressure like a sigh, like a
Okay.
And that sigh was really a cue for me for knowing that perhaps I wasn't dealing with the pressure. I was not going to be my best self. It was normally a sigh followed by a "oh, for goodness sake."
Yes, that internal dialogue that follows a sigh. Fabulous. Yeah. So I'm really interested in that word endure. Do you think there's something happened since you've gone to since we've been operating in a more hybrid way? Do you think that endurance now has moved and evolved even more? So it went into a sigh. So at least you didn't hold it, I'm hearing. It came out in a sigh. And has it evolved further since then so that you can understand it and manage it better?
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's we noticed that a lot of leadership cultures, high performing leadership cultures, were kind of synonymous with endurance cultures, which often leads to burnout because the human body and psyche can only endure so much for so long. And what I've been trying to think about, and what we try and think about with our leadership development here at Pax8, is how to go from endurance culture to resilience culture. And it really ties into a lot of stuff that you and I have worked on in the past, which is, how do you refuel yourself? How do you look after yourself so you're not about enduring, you're about being resilient through pressure?
Great. And I'm thrilled with this conversation, actually, because you're the first Chief People Officer that I've had on this podcast. So I'm loving already the links that you're making in terms of your overview of the leaders that you're working with and alongside, and how that maps out for a bigger picture. Especially, I mean, we'll go into your movement from Hive, where we met, to Pax8. But let's take you way back, Chloe, before I knew you. When do you remember first experiencing pressure?
It's very interesting. I was thinking about this because I remember when I first experienced nerves, which is, I think, is slightly different. Because when I used to do a lot of ballet and dance when I was younger, and was kind of submitted for competitions and that sort of thing, or before exams. So I remembered the nerves before going on stage or going into the exam room as quite a small child, about 5 or 6. But I don't think I really experienced pressure probably till I was a teenager, and then it was the classic thing of school exams when suddenly this stuff really mattered, and you have all the rhetoric around, this is about your future, this is about your career, this is about the university you'll get into. And I think I really experienced quite acute pressure going into my GCSEs. I think that's when I really, really felt it.
What do you think? Gosh, I'm curious about that distinction between nerves and pressure that you're making there, and how, as a younger child, nerves felt like part of the deal. To go and do in a dance, and yet something else has gone into your system, or our systems, when we go into the narrative exams, that ups it from nerves to pressure.
Yeah, and because I think the stakes are higher, really.
Okay.
That was certainly how it felt for me. The stakes felt really, really high. And it, like, whereas dance was fun, dance was a hobby. And I think, the thing with dance is it's quite brutal. So you start taking ballet lessons and you get to about 8, and your dance teacher basically says, you two here, you might make it. The rest of you, you will not make it. You are too tall, too big. No, you don't have the right feet.
So relate.
Which is kind of a brutal thing to hear when you're 8 years old, that you're too big to be a ballerina. But it kind of, I'm not sure if it's just the stakes weren't that high when you're 8 years old. I thought, I had a very stable, loving childhood. So I guess it, while it probably wasn't what I wanted to hear, it didn't like dent me or damage me in any way.
So the stakes were higher for exams for you?
Absolutely.
And how would you describe the difference between your experience of pressure versus nerves?
I think nerves are tingly. Is the physical sensation, and slight shortness of breath. Remember standing in the wings or just outside the room, and it is just that anticipation, and because it's the nerves. I think we say, well, you can say it's nerves or you can say it's excitement. It's a mindset thing, but the physical sensations are very similar. And it was just before, so whereas I think pressure, certainly for me in the exam situation, because you knew this date was coming and there's a lot of preparation, it was like a really long, slow burn that just built up and up and up over time. And it wasn't until like the event had happened that the pressure could be released, because that, even though I revised a lot, I was the girl with the index cards in the queue outside the exam hall doing the final. And again, it wasn't really till it was done that I kind of had that release. So I think it was a long build up, and I guess it wasn't tingly, it was in the gut, and it was twisty and knotty.
Yeah. And is that how you now experience pressure?
Still. And it's really interesting. My recurring anxiety dream, if I'm anxious, is I'm retaking my maths GCSE.
Not even your A levels?
I didn't do A level maths because, again, I had a very self-limiting belief that I was terrible at maths, because it didn't come naturally. I found it hard. I had to work hard at it. So GCSE maths, that was like my Achilles heel in my GCSEs. So that's still now, all these years later, That's if I have that dream, it's like, you're worried about something.
Yes. And presumably now you recognize it potentially earlier, maybe, and you are already, as you described earlier on, you've got mechanisms to
absolutely
lead with it. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I think it's one of the great gifts of this job, actually. Like you kind of have the luxury of really focusing on that, not just for the organization, but by proxy, you get to do it for yourself as well. Yeah. And understanding your pressure points and trying to recognize the signs and, nip it in the bud, and also understanding what fuels you, so you kind of can be resilient rather than switch into an endurance mode when it comes to pressure.
Yeah. So let's fast track up to the current situation. And I know that you've recently, how long have you been in this role now, Chloe?
Since January.
Right. So that is pretty recent, isn't it?
Yeah.
So can you just share how first of all you experience pressure and the difference between moving from a very fast startup growth company into a much larger enterprise, global enterprise? Can you just share how that has been for you and what you've done with that pressure? And then we'll go much broadly into how you manage others and their pressure.
Yeah, it's really interesting, because the startup I worked for, Wire Hive, which was acquired by Pax8 a couple of years ago. So Wire Hive journey for me was about 7 years. And there's both have pressure, but it was different. And it's really interesting in a startup, especially because we were an organically funded startup, so we did the bootstrap journey. So you are acutely aware that every new investment you make needs to pay off. And you are acutely aware that the success of the sales team and booking the revenue that month pays 30 people's mortgages. And when you're a small group and you all work in the same office as we did in the before times, it really matters. Like when the times are great, it's wonderful, it's fun, it's exciting, it's innovative, it's so agile. No stupid rules, and you can really kind of stretch your wings. But when things aren't going so well, there's not a big safety net. And so the stakes in some ways really couldn't be higher. You care about all of these people who are your colleagues, and you care about the success of the business that you put so much into when it's a startup. The startup journey is not for people who are looking for a 9 to 5:30 role. It takes a certain kind of person who wants to jump into a startup. So yeah, in some ways the stakes were incredibly high, and feel incredibly high. The interesting thing going to an enterprise is, Pax8 is a hyper growth enterprise. We sort of grow 80% year on year. Right. But so in a way that it's kind of too big to fail, which is a very different kind of way to operate and quite liberating in some ways. However, because of the pace of change and the bigger community that you're a part of, you go from being a community of 30 people to 1,300 people.
Yes.
And the growth and the ambition, the pace is even faster. And the great thing about a really well capitalized, successful, fast growing business is you go from having scarcity problems in startup to abundance problems. Now, abundance problems are much more fun to solve than scarcity problems. But what it does, it comes with a lot of options. And therefore, your decision making is in some ways even more important, because when you're in the very fortunate position of, well, what shall we choose to do, not what do we have to do to, make the P&L balance, then actually you want to get the best, both long-term result and, short-term win for the team. So actually, with everything possible, the pressure to make a great decision, I think, is even higher.
Because the choices are greater.
Absolutely. And don't get me wrong, it's a blessed position to be in. I do not complain, but I think that's the main difference I've noticed.
Yes. And so what shifts have you had to make in your own leadership?
I think the biggest thing for me, sort of the shift was not only going to a bigger company, but for the first time, I am only managing other managers, which was a big change for me. Before I sort of managed individual contributors. And I think the biggest change is what made me successful at Wirehive doesn't make me successful at Pax8. So what made me successful at Wirehive was knowing a lot about how the business worked, a lot, you know, all the different internet and parts, the institutional knowledge, and being able to get a lot of stuff done, being able to turn my hand to lots of things, being a completer finisher, having a lot of attention to detail, being very goal orientated. And so it was about the work I produced. The work product was a lot of my success, as you know, and then how I sort of led others to contribute to that vision. At Pax8 in this role, what my main contribution is really my presence and showing up for people and understanding that being there for people and making them the most important person in the conversation is the work. Having the energy and resilience to flip from meeting to meeting, scenario to scenario, person to person, and give that meeting or that person your full and undivided attention for that period. So people there are supported to make the best decisions possible and make sure we're all pulling in the same direction.
And so that is a pressure, is it, for you, in terms of it being so different, markedly different? I love this distinction you made between, you know, the sort of delivery and the product and the energy you put into that, and this new energy, which is actually hold back on the delivery of yourself, just turn up and be fully present for others, particularly in maybe the pressures that they're experiencing. It sounds like in that shift, there is a different energy you're having to connect with, Chloe.
Definitely. It is definitely different. And, you know, I think it's very easy. There's always stereotypes about, you know, once you get to a certain level of management, you don't do anything, you just sit in meetings all day. And to an extent that is true. But it's understanding that the work, the energy, the listening is still just as important, because what you're actually doing is you're taking all of these different inputs and efforts from really smart people who, you know, who have great ideas and have put the work in. And what you're ultimately there to do is steer or sometimes decide what the direction of travel should be with all of these great inputs and pieces of work that's going to move the business forward, while still making sure everyone there is fulfilling their own ambitions, doing the work that gives them joy, and feeling like they're part of a community and contributing.
Yeah, that's a big remit, hey? And it also links you, or links me as you're talking, to that connection between the decision making with wider choice than the decision making that is around keeping us alive.
Yes.
Keeping us sort of, it feels like it's more straightforward, even though I know the pressure must have been great in Wirehive, and the responsibility, as you say, of other people is huge and immense, but it sort of cuts through potentially the decision making in a way that is different from what you're describing now.
I think so. It's, you know, I think probably the decision making is was often A or B, or maybe A, B, or C, which which do we do? You know, it's in, you know, almost infinite paths.
Yeah. So in a larger role, in a larger enterprise, how does pressure show up for you now?
It's very interesting. I think sometimes the physical symptoms kind of still show up, but I think, I'm not sure if it's just because of a larger enterprise or just sort of my own recognition, but I feel able to sort of at least take a pause or look down on the symptoms. You see, almost sort of step out of yourself and look down on it. I don't always get it right, don't get me wrong. There's I think the pace and frankly the joy of having an amazing team who you just trust implicitly, you know, that is a gift that should never be taken for granted. It's, you're sharing the pressure a lot more. to be honest. I know that's not the case for every large enterprise. Some large enterprises have quite a toxic culture and it's very dog eat dog. But I'm very grateful that actually the pressure feels more distributed and it's more of a collective effort, and everyone is there because they believe in the same thing and we're all trying to pull in the same direction. Obviously everyone has their own stuff going on. We're all messy as human beings, and we can't always show up as our best selves every day. And that kind of causes some friction. But generally, the ability to sort of look and almost kind of understand that my role is probably to help diffuse pressure in other people is actually very rewarding.
Oh, how do you do that?
I see that as probably one of the primary roles as a leader. I believe human beings are all fundamentally good and no one shows up at work to coast or do a bad job. Everyone is smart and committed and wants to be the best they can. So if you believe that to be true, like I do, then as a leader, sometimes it's a little bit about correcting perspective, but it's not about changing the person. It's about how can that person be successful and use their gifts in the best service to the organization and their own fulfillment. And that's, a tricky path to navigate, especially in a high growth business, a lot of pressure. And so actually I see my role as just to sort of be there and listen and often help people unpick their own pressure they put upon themselves. Or, at times you have to give permission for people to not do something or to fail at something, or to say, actually, your idea is fantastic, but the business needs this right now. And I think if you're a leader who can listen consistently and you show up consistently and you have that trust with the team that you are privileged enough to lead, then you're able to do that. And sometimes when you do have to take the decision, it's actually a relief for people rather than seen as a diktat.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting tension, isn't it, as to at what time do you just need to make a decision, and people are looking at you just to make a decision, and at what time? I suppose you're talking here about that choice you're making in that moment of how many opinions do I need here, and and when do they actually just need me to make a decision?
Yeah, and it's so true. It's very interesting, and and to be fair, that is feedback I've had from my team as well about sometimes things they would like me to do more. I've always tried to be very democratic and collaborative. Very much a believer in the hire smart people and get out of their way philosophy. But sometimes, they've had that. It's like, sometimes we just like you to be more direct in the meeting. Don't just let us all talk on and on, just cut it and get us back on track, or get us to make a decision, or you make the decision. And I think in a world that is increasingly unstable and full of tension, I think sometimes that is what people are looking for. And especially when there is an embarrassment of choice. Yeah,
that's a useful phrase. Embarrassed. Did you see an embarrassment of choice?
Yes.
That's a fascinating phrase, embarrassment of choice. Okay, so can you share an example, Chloe, when pressure is tipped over? Because that the whole premise here for me is the exploration of how do we turn pressure into a positive force? Because I really wholly believe that people stretch with the right amount of pressure. And I've seen too many people feel they can't do something, and then actually when they go into it and they face that pressure, they evolve into something that really excites them and they grow. So what for you, can you share an example, because we've all had them, where that pressure has just gone too much and it's been probably one of the worst moments?
Definitely. I think it's an example from Wirehive, and it was when things weren't going so well, and actually we had to make some tough choices that actually involved making some people from the business redundant, which was incredibly hard. And I ran the marketing function at the time, and unfortunately when these things happen, the marketing function is often the first one up for grabs, because it's business growth, not business operations. And I still remember to this day sat around the boardroom table, and literally we all had a copy of the P&L in front of us, and I was like there with a pen and a ruler, and we were literally, what can we spend? We did everything we could to not touch people. But we were just staring down the barrel of we had to cut once and cut deep was the advice we were given. And I do believe it was the right thing to do. But I just still remember then, and the pressure got too much for me because it became like the ringing in my ears. And I was just retreated completely inside of myself at that point. And I didn't feel able to engage because I felt if I said anything, it would just all come out. It would just be an explosion of feeling and resentment and fear that this was a horrible thing. These were my people and they didn't deserve it. And I didn't want to do it. And it wasn't fair. And I still remember that even after we made the decision and I accepted it, we agreed. And I worked with the CEO at the time, who I still work with now. And he's like, I'm gonna tell them because I'm the CEO and I need to do it. And I always feel bad that I let him, because I'm like, but they're my people. But that's when the pressure had got to me, because normally I'd be like, no, this is a point of principle for me. It's horrible, but this is my job as a leader. I need to tell them. And I remember sitting in the room with him as he said these words, these awful, awful words to these people that I really cared about, and just sitting there and not being able to really say anything. And feeling like such a failure as a leader and an imposter for even thinking I could be there, because I couldn't rise to the occasion at that time. And it really did kind of mess with my head for a couple of months. But I kept it all inside myself.
I think it's worth pausing here for a moment to acknowledge how easy it is to allow a mood, feeling or event to ring in our ears for more time than it deserves. And to be aware that we are much more inclined to do this with negative feelings and experiences than we are with positive moments. I rarely hear people say, I felt so proud of the way I did that I let it ring loudly in my ears for 2 months. Because as humans, we have this tendency to pay too much attention to where we've messed up. We need to have ways to shift our mood and attention. Back to one of my favourite phrases, energy flows where attention goes. So what can we do to shift attention away from something that, as Chloe described, is messing with our head? This is highly individual, but what helps me and many of the people I work with is to start with the body. It's very hard to control your mind with your mind, so look to your body as a starting place. This could be anything from shaking out your hands to jumping up and down, walking strongly with intention, smiling. I find smiling is a great way to interrupt any pressure I'm under. It disrupts the feeling when you smile at the same time. I'm reminded of something Steve Williams in our team shared when he climbed Everest. He said, with your fingers going numb and spindrift cutting your face to bits, if you just smile to yourself, and sometimes you really have to force it, you actually start to feel warmer. Back to Chloe. What would be your advice about managing pressure in others? Particularly as a chief people officer, I think that is, in my experience of working with many, that the overview of the care and getting the best out of people is a massive responsibility, which requires something of you to be in that wonderful state that you just described a few minutes ago, Chloe, not in your bad experience when you say, to be there for listening, to be present, to be fully present. That requires an awful lot of practice and ability to shift your state, your own personal state, to be there for others in that regard. So how do you maybe we'll come to how you do that so that you are properly fueled to be able to have that energy, but how do you manage others when you see them in a really highly pressured state?
I think what I've learned, and I always thought would be useful, is being there for people. And I think that the biggest transition I've learned is when I first became a leader, I thought it was my job to fix everything. I was a rescuer and I'm still a recovering rescuer to this day. But actually what people just need, and where people perhaps are afraid to offer help because they don't know the solution themselves, people just need to be heard. People need to, the two things all human beings want is we want to be seen and we want to be understood. And just offering our hand, physically or metaphorically, to say, would you like to talk about anything? I'm here. And what I always say to people if they come to me for advice or I happen to talk to them, the conversation turns that way, I wasn't saying like, I say this to you from failing at this myself. So allow me to give you the opportunity to not have to face this painful situation that I did. And I'm always really clear with every leader in the business that I have failed many times and I will fail again. We will all fail because we are human. And as long as we are trying our best and operating in accordance with our values with positive intent and learning from those failures, that's fine. That's part of the process. But failure is inherent. And I think, it's never comfortable. No one likes failing. As much as we talk about, let's celebrate failure, let's talk about the fearless organization, our human beings are ego-driven creatures, and our ego takes a battering when we fail. And it's trying to sort of offer that gift to others so they can give that grace and space to other people too.
It's hard though, isn't it? Because it requires a lot of yourself.
It does.
And how do you make sure that you can be in that steady state, Chloe? Because, you talked about the current uncertainty and things are shifting. So, there are so many movements happening for all of us right now. It puts massive pressure in the system. So how do you operate? How do you personally take care of you to be able to show up in the way that you've just described?
I think I know that I need 8 to 9 hours sleep a night to operate at my best. And I've had to overcome a lot of, internal Protestant work ethic narratives about sleeping being for the lazy and you can sleep when you're dead. I need 8 to 9 hours and I can cope on 6. Don't get me wrong. I've done weeks on 6. I've done weeks on 4, but I'm not my best self and it's not sustainable at all. So sleep is really my kryptonite. If I don't get enough sleep, I'm not great. For me as well, it's balancing my week. So I'm a massive fan of hybrid working, even though I'm a chief people officer. I'm not in the office every day because I need to balance that in-person connection time, which fuels me in one way, but also drains me slightly. And I need to balance that with some time at home so I can, although it might be cool, video calls, I can still connect people. I can still have a bit of space. My own space is very important to me. My environment, and that really helps. It also helps with the sleep. Those days you get an extra hour in bed if you're not commuting. And I think just owning that and being happy and just saying, I know me and I have value and I know what I need to be successful. And I think as leaders, and particularly as women, we spend too long apologizing for that. And I remember one of the first things you taught me that's always stayed with me is about being properly selfish. And I say that a lot to other people. And when I see other people in that endurance mode or they're looking like they're going to burn out, and it's just like, what works for you? And it's little things like, I know if I've had a long day, like, don't just sit brain dead in front of Netflix, go and have a bath and read a book. It's still, you're not doing anything productive, but it refuels you in a way that's refuels me in a way that's much more useful than just sitting mindlessly in front of Netflix and scrolling on my phone at the same time. Yeah.
Yes. And do you need prompts to do that, to help you do that? Because often I know for myself, if I don't set up some sort of quite ritualistic approach to protecting that, it can slide very easily. And I know working with other people, this seems to be quite a key topic, is that the intention's there, but the action begins and then slowly fades as more things come into the to-do list, or that more pressure comes in, to remain properly selfish, because ultimately your bigger cause is to, as you've said, to be there and to be able to listen, to be present and turn up wholly you. There's a lot of choices just in that, isn't there?
So it's so true. And I know what's good for me. It doesn't mean I always do it, yes. Right? Like, I just want to be really honest. And yeah, so little things, I kind of try and set a bedtime alarm. So I have an alarm to get up in the morning, I have an alarm to, like, you should probably go to bed now. Yes. I actually, we have a rule as well in our house, only one box set at once, to try and stop the binging tendency of television and the mind-numbing things. Yes. And I always try and have a great book on the go, because I really love reading. And actually, if I know I've got a great book, I would rather go upstairs and have a bath and read that, than sit in front of Netflix now. And I know that's better for refueling for me.
Yes.
But I get it wrong. I get it wrong so many times. And when the pressure builds, it's like, I know what my habits, my bad habits are. But when the pressure builds, I'm like, well, if I just do a couple of hours work tonight, if I just do this, and if I take this on, back into my old habit of what used to make me successful, the thing that helped me pass my maths GCSE in spite of all my fears, the thing that helped me, get my first gig in marketing, helped me get the directorship at Wirehive, all those things, that sort of 25-year habit of, well, if I just do the work, then I can control the outcome. If I just work a little bit harder, a little bit longer, eventually we will get through this. I will get through this. It will be done. So it's, I'm by no means perfect at this at all. The other thing I have really learned, and I have got quite disciplined about, is booking my holidays at the start of the year. And I'm a massive advocate of holiday, and proper holiday, when you log out of everything and you leave everyone else and trust them to get things done. And you don't have the illusion that you are so indispensable and important that the whole organization will fall apart without you there for a week or two. And I not only am really passionate about that for myself, but in my team we do email managers every few months go like, this much of your team have not taken much of their holiday, because it's really easy in a world, one, where we couldn't go anywhere for 2 years, and two, that is uncertain, and maybe people feel, maybe people in a position where they feel they can't afford to go away, and so they just don't take the time. Also, I think work has become a place in some ways where we have many of our primary relationships, and so some people don't want to go with work because this is the place where they feel safe and they feel they have a connection, and actually the thought of holiday out of that doesn't feel good. And for me, that's a worry, because that is when we don't have a healthy blend between work and life.
And I'm interested in that bit about when you see things as a bit of a worry. So as a chief people officer, Chloe, when you see leaders, senior leaders, maybe even the CEO, when you see people, I'm going to say, leaking pressure or leaking unhelpful signs that you can see having an impact on various other people, and they seem unaware of that, or if they are aware of it, they're not necessarily choosing to manage it in the best way. How do you do? What do you do with that?
I always try and talk to them, but obviously it's, at the end of the day, it's an adult to adult conversation. I always try to veer away from lecturing, because no one wants that to be what HR do. You get a bad enough rep as it is. But no, we talk about it, and not just like one-on-one, but we talk about it as a group, the C staff in EMEA certainly, and around how important role modeling is in our leadership practice, and that's something I've always been very aware of it, and almost trying to say, I appreciate that you may feel that you need to do this, but the leaking is the problem, like you say. Obviously I'm concerned for them as an individual. I want them to have their holiday. They've got people they can delegate to. Everyone who works here, from the CEO to our new graduates, I want to feel like they can rest and relax. But I know it's different for different people. But like you say, the key thing is when it leaks. And it's actually, if someone feels like, oh, it's okay, I need to do this, but they're not pulling it off successfully, to the case where actually it's not good for them and everyone else can see that it's causing them stress. Because if we don't take rest seriously and loudly and proudly as leaders, it doesn't give permission for anyone else to do so. Certainly not people who think, well, I would like to progress in this organization. And if they see leaders who are always on email, always working late, never take their holiday properly, sit on the beach with their laptop, they're going to think, well, that's what it takes. And then some great talented people will opt out of that, being like, well, if this is what it takes, this is not for me. And I think I'm proof that that's not what it takes. Or they'll develop these behaviors and think like, oh, well, if I want to be seen as someone who has ambition, I should never take that holiday. I should always be seen. to be online. And that's incredibly toxic, not just for the individual, but for the organization as a whole.
I love Chloe's idea of taking rest seriously, loudly and proudly. Wouldn't it be great to have that as an instruction written up on the wall? Chloe referred earlier to a phrase I use a lot with leaders who are underfueled: properly selfish. To be consistently there for others, we have to be properly selfish, to look after us. What would you pay more attention to if you're more properly selfish? Chloe mentions how she has to focus even more on her refuel because what she now needs to be successful has evolved. Fixing got her so far, and now as a senior leader, fixing is less useful. She gives us a window into the self-talk that used to reinforce her old habit. If I just do the work, if I can control the outcome, if I just work a little bit harder and a little bit longer, eventually I will get through this and it will be done. The fact is, when you've been used to doing something that has served you well, it takes real effort to consciously do less of something well practiced and more of something less practiced. Here's a reminder of Chloe's properly selfish habits. 1. Bedtime alarm. Lack of sleep is her kryptonite. She needs to monitor it. She knows that 8 or 9 hours sleep is preferable if she's to operate at her best. 2. Have a bath and read a book. I'm with her on that one. I love a bath. She always has a great book on the go. In Claudia Hammond's research into people's most restful activities, interestingly, reading came out top. 3. Intentionally booking holidays and breaks across the year ahead. 4. They have a house rule, 1 box set at a time, to avoid any binging. And 5. Make sure that she has time on her own. Being with people can drain her, so she prioritises time in her own environment, at home. It gives her space. These matter to Chloe. They help her to remain consistent and to operate at her best. So what would you pay more attention to if you were not just selfish, but properly selfish? And once you've made your list, take it seriously, loudly and proudly. And you have regular conversations with your C-suite and EMEA, do you? For
Absolutely. We meet every week and we have, we talk about operational things, obviously, but we worry a lot. We sweat the detail a lot around, are we staying true to our culture? Are we living our values? Are we delivering for the organization in the way that we need to? And everyone makes their own individual choices, but I'm really grateful to my colleagues that there's never once been a moment where it's like, oh, well, people's your department, Chloe. Like you worry about the people. We'll do the business stuff over here. It's really ingrained in all of Pax8 that, your first responsibility, if you are a leader of people, is just that. And that is something that is a gift in this role, because I know it's not the case everywhere.
Yeah. And have you established any sort of rhythms and routines with your own team, Chloe, that in your view has made a significant difference, or in their view even, in a significant difference to be their best in increasing pressure?
I think from my point of view, that their point of view may differ, but we have a weekly people or leadership team meeting, and that is quite operational. It's about kind of checking in and solving issues. But the most important thing for me is that we have that space together. And actually, the agenda is quite loose, and so anyone can raise any issue. It's not my agenda; it's our agenda as a group. And what I'm also really scrupulous about having is weekly one-on-ones with every single person who directly reports to me. And again, our whole ethos here is the one-on-one is your meeting. People should bring their own agenda. It's my time to be there, be present, listen, recognize great achievements, help remove roadblocks. And sometimes it's really operational, but sometimes it's just a space. I think just in this world, which is so hectic and always changing, making sure you have those spaces, those dedicated, sacred spaces for people to show up and just be present with each other and be able to say what's on their mind is so important.
Yeah. Great. Thank you. And just from your position of being fresh, not even a year yet as a Chief People Officer, moving from startup to enterprise, what would you say is the biggest pressure right now for your organization?
It's really interesting because the biggest pressure is probably the same pressure for everyone. but it is also opportunity, which is the amount of uncertainty in the world right now is probably the biggest pressure. We've gone from a fairly stable period of economic growth. We work in cloud technology, which is, boomed during COVID. We were all able to work from home very well, and as we go into a recession, we know that what a lot of businesses will do is they will look to spend less on hardware and more on software, and they will, after probably a slight freeze in spending as they kind of come to terms with the changing conditions, they will look to make strategic investments to save the money long term, which normally means investing in cloud technology. We saw this in 2008, we saw it in 2011, we saw it during COVID. So we feel very confident that actually, if anything else, this will accelerate some digital transformation and lead to an upside. But we are very cognizant that the partners we work with are founder-led, smaller businesses, and they need to be in the right place to weather this. So our main kind of concern is supporting them and also supporting our people. So we're very much a service organization. Offer the service we offer to partners, being in service to our partners as a community, as an industry, is incredibly important to us. So our whole ethos is distribution is broken and the managed service provider is underserved, and that's the whole raison d'etre for Pax8. We're in service to our partners in terms of the account management we give, but we are always being in service to our people, and we've always had this philosophy of servant leadership right from our founder John Street. So this being in service to people means you do take on a lot of pressure as leaders. And I think particularly over the summer, it does feel like someone's been turning up the gas a little bit and it's a bit of a pressure cooker. We have, for the first time probably since the 1970s, a situation where people in work are worrying about heating their homes because of the energy crisis we see coming. So there's some real, we've just got through the existential threat of COVID. People are now, the world is opening up, and then suddenly our whole economic system, which was based on really low interest rates, interest rates are going up. So mortgage costs are going up, food costs are going up, and energy costs are going up. This is hitting people right at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy. That, sense of security and home is being threatened. And it's not, you can't say, it's people in high risk jobs or low income areas. This is affecting everyone. And on top of that, we have war in Ukraine and a worry that, this will compound the energy crisis. And there may even be a war over energy in Europe. So this is a, unprecedented, uncertain landscape. And then obviously today we're talking in Britain, the day after the Queen has passed, who has been there, who's been one constant in a lot of people's lives. A sense of national identity has suddenly gone. It's a whole whirlpool of uncertainty at the moment. And it's really hard for people to be their best and show up every day in those situations, no matter how fulfilling their role is and how much support you give as an organization. You have to accept people have stuff going on outside of work, and that will affect how they show up.
Absolutely. And I suppose, on the back of that, how do you focus all of that noise that's going on around you into something that feels, I think you used the words joyful at the start of this, Chloe. How do you create an atmosphere where people can respond to that growth and at the same time feel an element of joy? And you're watching this across all of your leaders, aren't you, in the territory that you're responsible for?
I think it's empathy is key. I think in a really fast growth business, we're very ambitious, we have big targets, and there is a lot to do and a lot that can be done. But I don't think we should ever confuse fast growth with rushing. And that's where the danger comes in. And I think that's how pressure shows. When things are uncertain, and I see this in myself, we look for control, and we look for control in action. It's like, I need to do something about this. I can't do anything about the swirl around me or my people. So let's channel our energy into doing something. And often where I've seen things go a bit wrong is if people rush to action rather than perhaps empathize and understand and be a bit more considered. It doesn't mean go slow, but it's the rushing that often causes the problem.
What I think you're talking about here is a moment of just pause, or just something that allows you to get out of rush and into choice or into decision. How do you do that for yourself, and how do you do that? How do you help your team or those around you focus on that when you see it?
I think a lot of the time is that's kind of one of the key responsibilities as a leader right now. It's having that perspective, and it's also bringing people together. I think that sense of connection is really important when times are uncertain. A lot of the times we find that moment because we've normally made a mistake. I'll be honest, and actually having an organization where you can hold up a mistake to the light and say, okay, look what we did here and look what happened. How can we learn from this collectively? It's not about blaming, no one did this intentionally, but it's a lessons learned, and it's having that psychological safety where we can do that as an organization. So that's about, in every meeting, soliciting opposing opinion, never asking anyone to apologize for voicing dissent, like actively praising people who do dissent, even if it makes the decision take longer, because that builds the kind of culture where we can talk about these things. And I think as well, again, having those set spaces in the diary, just to connect, whether it's one-on-one or as a group.
Yes.
And we talk, just the moment to discuss is important. But I also need my team to hold me to account there. And this is why psychological safety is so important, because it's a two-way street. Because as I always say to everyone, we are human too as leaders. We are fallible, and we can sometimes get carried away with our own bad habits, and sometimes the pressure gets to us. Obviously, it's our job to rise above it and try not to, but having a trusted team where you have that collaborative, trusted dialogue is so important during these times, because we're not always going to be able to show up as our best every day.
No. And being able to have those spaces to say it's not a great day for me. And you've got other people that's got your back. I think is what I'm hearing you say. Absolutely.
It is a gift. Because you can't do this alone. No one's superhuman. Everyone needs help.
Especially now.
Yes. Yeah. And I think back to my earlier point, I think sometimes leaders either we jump in and we try and fix everything, or we withdraw because we think, oh God, if I open that door, I have that conversation, I'm going to have to fix it. And I don't know how to do that. And I'm a bit scared. So if I just retreat here and put up this barrier of I am a leader and I will talk to you about operational things and nothing else, it's kind of a shield. And I think the most liberating thing I have learned is that people don't need you to fix them. They're adults. They have the solution. They just need you to sit there with them in the darkness and say, I'm here for you. Can I help you out? I have to solve it for them.
Great. Thank you, Chloe. Well, that leads nicely into the point of the podcast where I want to ask you two questions. Well, actually, one question with two answers. What would be the two things that you would pay forward to anyone listening to this podcast wanting to be better under pressure?
Two things I would always say is, you know more than you think. You've got to back yourself. You've got to crowd out those voices of self-doubt. And it's easier said than done. But, think about all you've achieved. Try and lean on that and get it in perspective. I think that's a really important thing. Sometimes when we're in it and in the weeds, it feels like finishing something or achieving something or acting is the most important thing we have to do. And if you can just take a breath and elevate out of the weeds, it gives you some really much needed perspective. You have the answer. You can do this. It's just often we sabotage ourselves, or we let circumstances take over.
Yes.
And the other thing that's related to that is never, ever be afraid to ask for help. These are big roles and you can't do it alone. And sometimes asking for help is just showing up as yourself and saying to your team, I too am an imperfect, flawed individual, and I am trying my best. And my commitment to you is I will always try my best.
Great. And if I asked you both those questions, Chloe, so back at you, how do you back yourself? How have you learned to back yourself? What do you do?
A lot of that is through experience. I doubted myself hugely when I started my career, and building up a little kind of smile file or trophy cabinet is really important. So having those, that's the point of resilience. You need those stores to look back on. So you need the stores of where you were successful. And awareness really helps. You kind of have that, that what your tendencies are, so you can have that dialogue with yourself rather than just letting the inner voice of you're not good enough, you can't do this, you're going to fail take over. So having that dialogue and having those stores of past achievements really help.
And presumably you built that up out of what I like about what you're saying there is that you need these things that have almost been constructed when you felt good, because in those moments when you don't back yourself, you need to have something very concrete to link back to stop that inner voice and stop that thinking that's going on.
Yeah, definitely. I'm definitely an empiricist, and when I'm stressed, I will go to the data. So actually I've tried to turn that, what can sometimes be quite a destructive habit of kind of going into the weeds, into something that works for me, because I just use the data of my past achievements to lift me up.
Love that. And the second question, ask for help. How good are you at asking for help?
I'm better than I was, not as good as I could be, is probably my summation there. But I think really for me, asking for help is both with sort of your peers and colleagues and having that really trusting relationship with your manager, but also with your team. They're the people you work with every day. They're the people you're all, I am there to support. And the relationship is so much richer than just sort of thinking, I'm here to support you, I must have all the answers, I must fix everything. It's such a richer relationship when you can be like, we're all in this together. You know more about this than I do, or today I'm having a bad day. It's a real team, a real community, a real connection. And I think that's just what everyone is looking for. And that's what I hope for everyone that they get from work. Because I think if you have that connection, that community, it really enables people to get into that space of self-fulfillment and joyful work.
What a great place to stop, Chloe. Thank you so much.
No worries. I've really enjoyed our chat today.
Me too. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Better Under Pressure with me, Sara Milne Rowe. If you enjoyed it, please do subscribe and let us know what you found useful or what you'd like to know more about. Our aim is to share as many examples as possible of what people do to manage pressure for better. If you're interested in any of the practices mentioned, check out my book, The Shed Method. Alternatively, you can find us at Coaching Impact or me on LinkedIn and Instagram. Better Under Pressure was produced by the fab team at Smart Cookie Media. Thanks so much for listening, and until next time, goodbye.